Britain in the 1990s built some of the most brilliant cars in the world and some of its most bewildering. This was a decade of contradictions. Rover was chasing Japanese reliability. TVR was chasing raw, unfiltered power. Lotus was chasing a completely new identity. And somewhere in the middle of all that ambition, 10 cars slipped through that owners would come to regret with startling intensity. Some looked promising on paper but crumbled in the driveway. Some were engineering gambles that never quite paid off. Others were simply strange decisions nobody at the factory seemed willing to question. Stick around, because what happened to the car at number 1 was worse than almost anyone driving it ever expected, and we're saving that story until the very end. Number 10. Land Rover Discovery Series 1. The Discovery arrived in 1989 as Land Rover's answer to a growing appetite for family-friendly off-roaders, and by the early 1990s it had become a genuine British success story. Designed with input from the Royal College of Art, its boxy shape and asymmetric bonnet bulge gave it real character, and beneath the surface sat proven Range Rover mechanicals. But that inherited hardware brought inherited problems. Early Discoveries suffered from patchy electrics, notorious head gasket weaknesses on certain engines, and interior trim that rattled and wore faster than buyers expected for the price. Owners loved the capability off-road, yet dreaded what might fail next on the school run. Would you have trusted one on a long motorway trip? Servicing costs crept up quickly, and rust around the chassis and sills became a recurring headache within a few years of ownership. Sales remained strong regardless, because nothing else offered quite the same blend of practicality and go-anywhere ability. But that popularity meant thousands of owners quietly learned to live with faults many other buyers never saw coming, and the next car on this list took reliability concerns to an entirely different level. Number 9. MGF. Launched in 1995, the MGF was meant to resurrect a badge that had been dormant for over a decade, and it did so with a genuinely clever piece of engineering. Rover fitted it with a mid-mounted engine and an unusual hydrogas suspension system, borrowed and adapted from decades-old Austin technology, to deliver a supple ride that belied its compact size. Critics praised the handling, and buyers responded enthusiastically at launch. But that hydrogas system, so central to the car's appeal, would soon become its Achilles heel. Units began losing pressure over time, leaving cars sitting unevenly or riding harshly, and repairs proved expensive and increasingly difficult to source parts for. Head gasket failures on the K-Series engine, a problem that would haunt Rover for years, added another layer of frustration for owners who thought they'd bought something dependable. Do you remember seeing one broken down at the roadside? Many did. Despite genuine driving talent, the MGF's reputation slowly soured as running costs mounted. It sold well throughout the decade, but few owners escaped without at least one uncomfortable trip to the garage. Number 8. Rover 800 Coupe. By 1992, Rover desperately needed a halo car, and the 800 Coupe seemed like the answer. Sleek, low, and originally conceived with the American market in mind, it paired handsome 3-box styling with a Honda-sourced 2.7-liter V6 engine producing smooth, effortless performance. On paper, this was Rover at its most aspirational. Yet the car arrived just as Rover's reputation for patchy electrics and inconsistent build quality was still fresh in buyers' minds. Interior trim felt cheaper than the price suggested. Tan leather seats had an unfortunate habit of fading toward green, and rust crept into the coupe's bodywork earlier than owners expected from something marketed as premium. Would this have fooled you into thinking it matched a BMW or Mercedes coupe of the era? Many buyers were fooled, and many came away disappointed. Sales never came close to matching Rover's ambitions, and the American market it was originally built for had already been abandoned by the time it launched. What started as a hopeful comeback story became another quiet disappointment, but Britain's next strange creation didn't even try to be conventional in the first place. Number 7. Reliant Robin. Few cars in British motoring history carry as much mythology as the three-wheeled Reliant Robin, and by the 1990s that reputation had only grown louder. Built with a fiberglass body over a steel chassis, the Robin was designed to sit in a cheaper tax and licensing category thanks to its unusual three-wheel layout. That single missing wheel, however, became the source of endless jokes, viral moments, and genuine anxiety among owners navigating roundabouts. The truth is more nuanced than the stereotype suggests, and much of the tipping reputation traces back to exaggerated demonstrations rather than everyday driving. Even so, buyers who purchased one expecting a quirky bargain often found themselves fielding constant questions, stares, and unwanted attention every time they parked. Could you imagine explaining that car to your neighbors? Reliability itself was reasonably solid for such a simple machine, but the social cost of ownership proved harder to bear than any mechanical fault. Production continued into the new millennium regardless, a stubborn survivor of an earlier automotive age. What came next embraced strangeness far more deliberately, and with far less charm. Number 6. Lotus Elan M100. When Lotus unveiled the second-generation Elan in 1989, it shocked the entire sports car world by abandoning rear-wheel drive entirely. For a brand built on the philosophy of lightweight, driver-focused engineering, going front-wheel drive felt almost like heresy to loyal enthusiasts. Powered by an Isuzu-sourced 1.6-liter engine, available in naturally aspirated and turbocharged form, the M100 was engineered with extraordinary care to prove front-wheel drive could still deliver genuine Lotus handling. And remarkably, it worked beautifully behind the wheel. Yet the motoring press and traditionalist buyers simply couldn't get past the badge on the bonnet promising something it technically no longer delivered in the way purists expected. Sales struggled badly, especially in America, where pricing landed uncomfortably close to a Chevrolet Corvette. Owners who genuinely loved the car often found themselves defending their purchase at every petrol station. General Motors pulled the plug after fewer than 4,000 cars were built. It was a car ahead of its time, misunderstood by the very audience it needed most, but the next entry misunderstood something far more basic about what British car buyers actually wanted. Number 5. Vauxhall Vectra Mark I. Arriving in 1995 to replace the well-liked Cavalier, the Vectra should have been a triumph. Vauxhall poured serious investment into its development, and early press claimed it boasted the most aerodynamic wing mirrors in the world at launch. Unfortunately, that was about the most exciting thing anyone could find to say about it. Underneath the unremarkable styling sat an interior dominated by hard, grey plastics and fabric that seemed engineered specifically to disappear from memory the moment you stepped out. Company car drivers across Britain found themselves stuck with a vehicle that drove competently enough but inspired absolutely no affection whatsoever. Can you imagine choosing one over its more characterful rivals? Thousands did, simply because fleet contracts demanded it. Reliability was broadly acceptable, which almost made the disappointment worse, because there was no dramatic failure to blame, just relentless, grinding mediocrity. Vauxhall eventually addressed this with a proper performance variant, but not for another decade. For an entire generation of company car drivers, the Vectra became shorthand for automotive regret. But financial regret of an entirely different scale was waiting further up this list. Number 4. Jaguar XJ220. Few British car stories carry as much promise and heartbreak as the Jaguar XJ220. Unveiled as a concept in 1988, it captured the imagination of enthusiasts everywhere with a screaming 6.2-liter V12 engine, four-wheel drive, and scissor doors, all wrapped in a shape designed to chase 220 miles per hour. Deposits poured in almost immediately, with buyers handing over £50,000 each simply to secure their place in what looked set to become Jaguar's ultimate supercar. But the biggest problem hadn't appeared yet. By the time production finally began in 1992, the V12 was gone, replaced by a twin-turbocharged V6 borrowed from a rally program, four-wheel drive had been dropped, and the scissor doors never made it past the concept stage. The car that emerged was genuinely fast, eventually setting a production car speed record, yet it bore little resemblance to what buyers had actually paid for. Would you have accepted a completely different car to the one you'd ordered? Many refused, demanding their deposits back, and lawsuits followed. Jaguar ultimately won in court, but the damage to trust was already done, and dozens of finished cars sat unsold for years afterward, and Britain's next entry took obscurity and turned it into something almost theatrical. Number 3. Marcos Mantara. Marcos Cars had spent decades as one of Britain's smallest and most eccentric manufacturers, and the Mantara, introduced in the mid-1990s, continued that tradition with a striking, low-slung body wrapped around a Ford V8 engine borrowed from the Mustang. On paper, that combination promised serious performance wrapped in genuinely head-turning styling. In practice, buyers quickly discovered the realities of owning something built in tiny numbers by a company with limited resources. Panel gaps varied noticeably between individual cars, interior fittings occasionally felt improvised rather than engineered, and specialist parts could take considerable time to source when something went wrong. Do you remember ever actually seeing one on British roads? Very few people did, given how limited production runs remained throughout the decade. Owners who bought into the dream of low-volume British exotica often found themselves becoming their own mechanics out of sheer necessity. Yet for those willing to tolerate the compromises, the driving experience delivered genuine thrills few mainstream cars could match. Compared with what came next from another small British manufacturer, though, the Mantara's issues almost look manageable. Number 2. TVR Chimaera. TVR built its reputation throughout the 1990s on delivering enormous performance at a fraction of supercar prices, and the Chimaera, launched in 1992, became one of the brand's most popular models as a result. Fitted with a Rover-derived V8 engine and wrapped in dramatically curvaceous fiberglass bodywork, it offered genuinely thrilling acceleration and a soundtrack few rivals could match at anywhere near the price. But TVR's small-scale, hand-built approach came with serious compromises that buyers often only discovered after signing the check. Electrical gremlins were common, interior switchgear felt fragile, and build quality varied significantly depending on which week your particular car left the Blackpool factory. Would you have accepted that trade-off for the performance on offer? Thousands did, drawn in by the sheer drama of ownership. Some owners became devoted enthusiasts despite the faults, while others sold within a year, exhausted by constant trips to the dealership. It was intoxicating and infuriating in equal measure. And if you thought that combination sounded difficult to live with, the next car on this list made it look almost tame by comparison. Number 1. TVR Cerbera. Nothing on this list caused quite as much heartbreak as the TVR Cerbera, launched in 1996 as the company's most ambitious road car yet. For the first time, TVR designed and built its own engine entirely in-house, an extraordinary achievement for such a small manufacturer, producing a flat-plane crank V8 borrowed conceptually from Formula One racing. On paper and in a straight line, it was sensational, offering supercar performance at a fraction of the cost of anything wearing an Italian badge. In practice, that homemade engine proved catastrophically unreliable in its early years. Owners reported blown engines, cracked components, collapsing suspension, and electrical faults so persistent that some drivers accumulated more miles visiting the dealership than actually enjoying the road. One owner amassed roughly 2,000 miles simply traveling back and forth for repairs. Interior finishing was widely described as frighteningly poor for the asking price. Warranty claims became a way of life rather than a safety net. Some owners genuinely loved the raw experience despite everything, but many others sold at devastating losses, having discovered too late just how experimental their supercar truly was. That's the strange, frustrating, and often heartbreaking story of 10 British cars from the 1990s that left their owners with genuine regret. It's a reminder that ambition doesn't always translate into reliability, and that some of Britain's boldest engineering decisions came at a real cost to the people who trusted them. Which of these surprised you the most? Did you or someone you know ever own one of these cars, and did your experience match what we've covered today? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're enjoying Britain's forgotten automotive history, consider subscribing for more. Until next time, this has been Britain Rewind, where the past is never quite as simple as it looks.